All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Steph Davis. I am the chair of Fit Square PAC. We are an urbanist political action committee devoted to the built environment. That includes public transit, our roadways, public spaces, and of course, housing. This is what we're here to talk about tonight. In just a minute, I'm going to hand the mic over to our treasurer, Russell Ritchie, to get started on the panel itself. But first, I just wanted to give a few updates on the organization itself. So I don't know if you saw the tweet today, but Fit Square did analyze the written comments on the PennDOT I-95 plan, and we found that a majority of survey respondents commented saying that they're in opposition of the plan in all project areas. So thank you to everyone who responded to that survey. I know we made a big push for that. We're going to keep the pressure on so that hopefully we don't have highway expansion in Philadelphia. Also, on Spruce and Pine Street, as I'm sure all of you are aware, Spruce Street is where Dr. Barbara Friedis lost her life, and it's still unprotected. And in fact, some of my neighbors witnessed another crash at 10th and Spruce just the other day. It wasn't fatal, but there was an injury, and it just needs to stop. So if you haven't already, please visit the Bicycle Coalition website and sign that petition for full protection, not just in Spruce and Pine, but across the city. It also helps pedestrians just by being daylighting for those roads. And then in the transit funding world, we still need to keep the pressure alive on our elected officials. We did not get all the funding that we needed in the latest State House budget. So stay connected to Transit Forward Philly and the Save the Train campaign, because in the fall, we're hoping for another push for funding. And this isn't something that we can give up on. We need that funding in order for SEPTA to operate. And then with that, I also want to see how many of you are members of Fit Square in the room tonight. Love it. Thank you so much. And also thank you if you donated toward this pizza here tonight. We greatly appreciate it. If you're not a member, consider signing up with Will Tommy over in the back here. If you are a member, please consider upping your donation. Indy Hall has been an amazing space for us, and we want to keep this up, and we want to be able to host events like this in the future. So if you do find that you've had a lovely evening and you want to see more of this, please consider donating. We're always building the war chest for political champions as well. And we do have t-shirts for sale in the back there. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Russell Ritchie, but I'm going to go around a long way, so excuse my awkward walk. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I'm Russell Ritchie. I am the treasurer of Fit Square. I am also on the board of our second co-sponsor for tonight, which is the Robert Schachenbach Foundation, which is a foundation dedicated to Georgist ideas, named most famously that being land value tax, which we are here to talk about tonight. I'm joined by the executive director of the Robert Schachenbach Foundation tonight, so thank you so much for supporting this event. And yeah, if you're interested in that stuff, please look us up. So for tonight, the idea is to talk to everybody about this idea of land value tax, which is potentially powerful, but also a little mysterious. And we want to sort of demystify this for you. So to get started, what I'm actually first going to do is hand it over to Josie, who is going to give a short presentation about what is land value tax and how does it work. Okay.
I'm going to give you a short presentation about what is land value tax. And I'm actually going to start that presentation with what is property tax. So I'm guessing that this crowd all probably know this inside and out, but just in case you don't, a little refresher, because I talk about land value tax a lot, and often what I find is that people just aren't totally familiar with property tax and how that works. And so land value tax is just sort of a different flavor of a property tax, and so it helps to kind of be on the same page about what we're starting from. So Philadelphia's current property tax system looks just like this, right? Just as common, simple algebra. Almost every municipality in the country calculates property taxes the same way. There's basically two components to the assessment of any parcel's value. One of those is improvements, that's buildings, your homes, your businesses, that sort of thing. And the other is land. An assessor's job, and Philly has a really good assessor, is to value every single parcel in their jurisdiction to market rate. So if the parcel was sold, ideally it would sell for what it is valued to by the assessor. And that consists of those two components, right? Improvements and land. Those components, those two values are added together and a tax rate is applied. That simple calculation is what derives your tax bill. In Philadelphia, your tax rate is 1.3998%. So basically for every $100 of property value that you own, you're going to owe the city about $1.40 per year in property taxes. Okay, hopefully that's familiar, but I'm quite sure this is familiar, which is the fact that if you improve your property tax bill will go up. Who is familiar with this? Okay, we're all implicitly familiar with this, right? And it's because of the way that this is calculated. We saw improvement value, which is buildings, which is what we're investing in, is part of the calculus, right? And there's a single rate applied. So basically what a traditional property tax is telling the market, and I want to stop here because I feel like the market sounds like it's some anonymous force out there, LLCs and white men, cloistered apartments somewhere investing, right? But we're the market. I'm the market. You're the market. I used to live in Philly. I lived in East Mount Airy for 5 years. I owned a home there. You all either own or rent here, or you just really like it enough to come to this event. But we're the market. And so when we're paying our taxes, this traditional structure is telling us it's okay if you want to invest, but you're going to pay for that, right? And so it's inherently telling us not to make those investments. Conversely, it's telling us that if we don't invest, our tax bills will stay low for the same exact reason, right? Because that improvement value is being hit with the same tax rate as the land value. And it's not just us, the sort of human beings in the room. It's folks who aren't in Philly, maybe don't ever come to Philly, but think, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could buy a plot of land, keep it at a super low carrying cost, and maybe it looks a lot like this and it's a blight on the neighborhood, but heck, I'm not there. And my hope is that the market is going to rise around me, and when I can sell it, I sell for a profit. And so the existing property tax system, what you get, is the property tax system that exists in almost every municipality in the country, is telling people these two things. These are not great things. A land value tax is very much like a traditional property tax, but it changes the messages that are being sent to the market, to us, and to all of those out-of-state investors as well. So if you look at the components of this calculation, you'll recognize that this is just simple algebra, just like a regular property tax calculation. And it's got basically the same components, right? You got your improvement value, you've got your land value. But here's the key difference. With a traditional property tax, you have one rate that's applied to those combined values. With a land value tax, which is also called a split rate tax, because you have two rates. You have a lower rate that's applied to the improvements, a higher rate that is applied to land. Same thing, algebra, and you end up with that tax bill, right? But the message that's being sent to you, me, LLCs, and everybody else is completely different. You make an investment, you improve. The tax rate on improvements is lower than a traditional property tax, right? So you're going to see your bill not rise by as much. You LLC, anybody, right? So there's less of a tax penalty for investment. And in a true land value tax, you completely untax improvements. So the tax rate that you put on improvements is actually zero. So if you build a house on a vacant lot, you expand your home, you improve your business, your tax bill doesn't go up. And that's a heck of a signal to be sent into the market, right? So all of us as the market. And at the same time, holding on to land and doing nothing with it costs you a heck of a lot more. If you think about it, it's not just the fact you should have a higher tax rate applied to the value of land. Sure, that absolutely could cause your tax bill to go up. Like what you have is this. If you've been holding on to land and it's been super cheap for you from a tax perspective because you don't have any improvements and those are being taxed, suddenly you're paying full freight. And because of implementing a land value tax should always be done in a revenue neutral fashion, meaning this isn't the time to get greedy. It's not the time to try to up your property tax revenues, right? Switching to a land value tax will change everybody's tax bill. This is enough of a shock to the system. Not a bad shock to the system, but it's a change, right? And the market has to have time to adjust. So we would never recommend that you go for increasing the revenue. But even holding it
neutral, holding it constant. If you're untaxing improvements, you're putting additional tax pressure on land. And so you're making it really expensive to do this, where before it probably cost almost nothing. And so these two things combined are what tell the market to behave completely differently and what makes land value tax kind of magical. So we're going to talk about that magic here, so I'm not going to spoil it all right now. But just a couple things to remember before we get into more of the nitty-gritty. The first one is, it's just math. It's just algebra. It's not even hard math. We can all do this math. And I say this because I talk to so many people, including professional assessors, who just don't even want to hear it. It's taxes, it's boring, I don't want to know. But the reality is this shapes the world that we live in. It's not just our tax bill. It's everything that tax bill is signaling to the rest of the world about the kind of city that we want to live in, right? So this is just math. We can understand it, and everybody else can too. This, a land value tax, uses exactly the same valuation process as the taxes you're already paying. There's nothing changing there. The process that the assessor is using to determine the value of land and the value of improvements should remain the same, because ideally it's accurate no matter what rate structure you're using, right? So that can remain the same. You can also carry forward your exemptions and abatements. So Philly, for example, has a homestead exemption. That's great. A lot of places have it, right? It's to keep people in their homes, to make sure they're not priced out of their own homes by increases in property taxes. If you probably want that, keep it. There is no reason you can't have that other land value tax or any other exemption or abatement that you already have. And if you implement it and you realize, hey, a segment of our population is actually getting hit with higher taxes and you don't want them to, well, you can create another tool of that same type. Those tools don't go away under a land value tax. Also, revenue neutral, very important. And then we also recommend a phased implementation. So again, this will change people's tax bills. People do need time to adjust. And so I think in circumstances like this, we can get really excited, right? Because we're all on probably close to the same page. We think this looks like a cool idea. We're interested in what it can do. But the rest of the world is not necessarily quite as excited. So you got to give time for people to get used to what's coming their way. So basically, adopting LVT is going to have a lot of demonstrated land use impacts. They're good ones, by the way. We'll talk about those. And economic benefits as well. But yeah, so the purpose of this was just to make sure that we all feel comfortable with specifically what we're talking about. It isn't anything complicated, but I think sometimes you hear taxes and it feels complicated. So,
all right, thank you so much, Lily. Yeah, people are that's right. That's what excellent. So now I'm going to moderate some questions for our panelists. Before I do that, I would love to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. And I know you've already done this a little bit, Josie, but maybe you can do it again.
Hi, I'm Josie Foss. I'm the executive director of the Robert Schachenbach Foundation. We have a very hard to pronounce name. This is not lost on me. But the mission is very simple. It's about natural resource sharing. It's about the fact that we think that there is enough for everybody, and we just need the kind of policies that are going to make it possible to rise all shows.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, sir. Yeah. Hi, my name is Joe Casey. Up until last January, I was the state assessor in Alaska, and I left to found the Tom Johnson Foundation, which is another group. We work with local governments right now who are trying to maybe implement a land value tax.
Hi. I'm Veena Patel, Finance Director for City of Allentown. We do have a split rate, and we have it since 1996, and it's economically working out great for us. I have been working for City of Allentown for the last 18 years, and it has helped us economically. And I will let my revenue and audit manager explain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Zumis. As Bina said, I'm Bureau Manager for the Revenue and Audit Bureau, responsible for overseeing the city real estate taxes and Act 511 business privilege taxes. I've been with the city for a little over 11 years, but yeah, as Bina said, we have had a bifurcated or a split rate going back to 1990s.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name's Andy Toloy. I know a bunch of people here. Shout out to Ray and Josh, Maurice, Jawad, Rob Patel. But anyway, so now I've got you on my side. I am the policy director for Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations, or PACDC, and we work with neighborhoods across the city to support community development corporations building affordable housing and sustainable commercial corridors and great neighborhoods for everybody across the city.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So to kick it off, I have a question for you, Josie. So you spoke a lot about the principles behind this and sort of the effects that in theory this is supposed to have. I'm curious though, we heard that it has been implemented in Allentown, but I'm curious if you can speak to us a little bit. Now, where has it been implemented? What have we learned from those places where this has been tried?
Sure. So internationally, it's been implemented in a number of places like Singapore to Australia, but I think we really care most about where it's been implemented in the US. And happily, almost all those implementations, happily for us here, have happened in Pennsylvania. And actually, I just want to shout out to Josh Vincent, who's sitting right there. Josh, raise your hand. Josh was actually the person who was pounding the pavement, making that happen. So he should be up here. I'm up here, so I'll talk right now. But if you can, grab him because he's got amazing firsthand experience bringing the LBT to different communities. But in all, it's been used in about 21 different municipalities and school districts in Pennsylvania. Some still are using it. Some kind of toggle it on and off like a switch, which is interesting. And it's being explored in a number of places outside of Pennsylvania as well. So my organization is working closely with Richmond, Virginia. They are in the midst of a node-based upzoning project, which is not that uncommon, right? But they're looking at a land value tax as a way to capture the value that they're creating through that really intentional upzoning, right? Because if you think about it, when you upzone, you're creating value in land. And so a land value tax is a really great, free, passive way of capturing a heck of a lot of the value that you're creating. So they're very seriously looking at that. I just jotted down some notes about who else we've been talking to. Baltimore, Detroit's the biggie, have well been following Detroit and what's happening there. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen because of some politics with some Democrats who don't like the mayor, but don't vote me on that.
It's okay. It's not like some video or anything.
Okay. Well, anyway, you can vote me on that, I guess. I also don't think that's any great secret. But the work that's been done in Detroit is amazing. And I think the effects that would be felt in Detroit if they were to implement it would be equally amazing. Detroit and Philly have a lot of things in common. You know, not everything, obviously, the city's really unique, but there's a lot of commonalities that make LBT feel potentially like a really good fit. And I know this isn't the first conversation about LBT in Philly. I feel like maybe the time's right, so we'll see. In New York, many places in New York are looking at it. The state of Colorado just had a tax commission where we testified on LBT. South Carolina, Indiana, we've got lawmakers reaching out from all different places across the country. Sometimes it's their staffers who are very progressive. Sometimes it's the lawmakers themselves. But there's a lot of places that are experiencing things like disinvestment, lack of affordable housing. They're looking at that their city's kind of sprawling out and wanting to figure out how to counteract that. So LBT looks like a good choice.
Well, you talked about places where that are thinking about this, but what about the places that have actually done it?
I have a list. I have a list that's my brain cannot hold to 21 names of places in Pennsylvania that have implemented. But here's some highlights. We've got let's see, Harrisburg, Hazeltown, Lock Haven, McKeesport, Newcastle, Oil City, Pittsburgh, Scranton, Steeltown, Titusville, Washington. The list goes on. And interestingly, Pittsburgh got rid of their LBT, and now they're wanting to bring it back. So we're putting in such conversations with some folks there about what that might look like. And it looks pretty good for them. So good stuff.
All right, cool. And I believe that the places that have tried this have seen growth in housing, growth in business starts, other good stuff. Is that correct?
Lots of good stuff.
Lots of good stuff.
We get to talk specifically about the good stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, we will later, I think. Okay, Joe, I have a question for you. So you have a background in assessment, and I think one of the things that's puzzling to a lot of people about land value tax is how do you separate for a built building like the one we're in right now? How do you separate, like, you might see that building get bought and sold, which is, the land and the building together. How do you separate for a already constructed building its value into land and building?
So it is maybe an extra step in assessment, but it's very doable. It's done all the time. One way might be is, what if next door to you is a vacant lot that sells? That would be the easiest thing, and that would be nice. So we do, anywhere does still have vacant land that sells, and you can look at that, and you can interpolate from those sales. Another thing that happens is you have virtually vacant lots that sell, which is lots that have an improvement on them, but that improvement gets torn down right away. So obviously, whoever bought that was not buying it for the improvement, they were buying it for the land. So you have that. You also have something called the residual method, which is you basically look at, well, what would it cost to build this improvement that's on the land already? And you can basically take that off of the sale price of the improved parcel, and then whatever's left came from the land. So there's a lot of different methods, and it's really interesting. This was always my favorite thing to do when I was doing, math or science problems, is you can approach the problem from multiple different directions, and if they all point towards the same answer, then you've got your answer. So there's plenty of market evidence. There's also some really advanced, cool techniques. So like we're using some of the tools that ValueBase provided for us. They are doing some really, really cool stuff in terms of doing land valuation. So there's a plethora of methods, and at the end of the day, it's no more complicated than the current way that your assessor does valuations.
Excellent. Thank you. Bina and Michael. So I'm curious to hear about how your work in the Allentown Finance Department comes into contact with land value taxation. And from your perspective, what is it like administering a land value tax?
I could touch on that. So we are a little bit different from the city of Philadelphia, where we're not responsible for issuing the assessment. That information is going to be handled at the county level. So when that information does trickle its way down to the city of Allentown, actually implementing the millage rates on the assessed value, as Josie said, I think even I can do it. So it is a simple thing once that information does get to us. And I think even at the county level, I don't think there was many obstacles.
You might have to turn on your mic.
Sorry, I'll speak into it a little bit more. I'm sorry. So I think there wasn't many hurdles at the county level, but once that information does make its way down to the municipal office where we are, it is super simple in implementing it.
Excellent. I'm curious, another question for Bina and Michael, if Allentown has done any analysis about the effects of its split rate tax system, or about what would happen if it reverted to a single property tax rate.
So there was an analysis done a few years back just to analyze the effectiveness of it. And what the findings were is that for the city to revert back to moving away from the bifurcated rate to having one tax rate on both the land and improvements, it would shift the tax burden from commercial for-profit enterprises to single-family residences, row homes, things like that. So there would be, and that would, as Josie touched on, if this is being considered, that it would be revenue neutral. So if our billing, initially we collected, let's say, $30 million in real estate taxes, the following year, the same thing, we would have to try and get that number to match at 30.
Gotcha. So sort of inverting that logic, it sounds like in some places, if they were to move to a split rate tax system, it might then provide tax relief for homeowners and potentially commercial would pay a little more.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Interesting. Bina, I am curious to hear about if you can say anything about, the health of Allentown's finances these days. And obviously split rate taxation is just one part of that. So, we can't attribute everything to, the split rate taxation, but I'm still curious to sort of hear about the overall picture of Allentown's, the financial health of the city.
Sure. So since COVID time, we obviously, like any other taxing authorities and any other entities, we suffered during COVID time. And we had layoffs and, the earned income tax got affected. And so, but after that, we, the city of Allentown, received the stimulus money from the federal government of $57 million. And the property owners continue paying that their property taxes with the assistance from, we also have a tax rebate program, which helps the fixed income residents with relief. So currently, the city of Allentown is financially healthier than we were 5 years ago. Our fund balance is about 31%. At 31%, which it increased. Moody's recently upgraded us from A3 to A2. So we are doing actually great with and the split rate is definitely helping us. And it's helping the whole median income families. So people who are owning row homes, single family homes, apartment, so their rents are not increasing at a greater rate.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, please do. And of course, any panelist, feel free to jump in at any time.
Another thing that is telling, since I've been with the city in 2013, I think we've only had 1 year of a tax increase, and that was the 2018-2019 year. I mean, it's been talked about, but that is another telling to close.
Excellent. I was going to ask you, Josie, about the other places you're talking to, but you already spoke to that. You got ahead of me a little. So the next question I think then is for Joe. So you were the state assessor again in Alaska, and I'm curious if you can speak at all to what about that experience, if anything, made you interested in land value tax and sort of made you think it would be a good thing? What in a, working as an assessor made you a fan of LVT?
So I don't know that being an assessor in itself, I'd been exposed to the idea before I even knew a ton about property tax. So that had always interested me. I'll say Anchorage is, we have, you picture Alaska, these big wide open lands, but we're almost on an island. We have a finite amount of land. In downtown where, I would love to live, I couldn't afford a place downtown. And there are a bunch of parking lots down there. And so we have the same problems that you probably have here in terms of underutilized land. And so even though it's Alaska, it's that. I'll say, it was also a parallel to here is that the fact that the opinion of assessors seems to be that land is not a big deal, which is that right now you have a default of, I believe, 20% of your property value is land, because it doesn't matter right now. You're taxing it at the same rate. So, who cares? And the same thing was true in Anchorage and across Alaska. I started nudging them when I became aware of this because they were undervaluing land, and that was part of it. Was they were saying, well, who cares? Everyone's just paying their total property value. It doesn't matter. But the reality is, you also had parking lots in downtown Anchorage that were getting the same per square foot value as the residential lots or whatever. And by being undervalued, it wasn't just this flat tax. It was actually maybe the opposite. It was not just a neutral, oh, well, you can hold a parking lot if you want. That's cool. They were getting rewarded for holding a parking lot.
Excellent. Well, that's probably a good segue to pivoting to Andy. So, we've heard about why other places are considering this, the sort of, in theory, good reasons for supporting it. I'm curious, what makes you think this is right for Philadelphia?
Ooh. First of all, I want to acknowledge that, taxation must be very sexy because there's a lot of people here. So I appreciate the interest in Philadelphia, because sometimes we talk about taxes and nobody shows up, I think. But thank you for coming and being advocates hopefully for what we're talking about. So the question is, why is it good? What could happen in Philly probably, and why now? First of all, I want to say that I was a skeptic. The funny thing is, the Henry George House is in Philadelphia. For those who don't know, he was living in Philly, I guess, and proposing all these things. I'm sorry. He was born in Philly. Wow. So, all these
Henry George.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Henry George is the guy that sort of promoted this idea that land has value that's increased not by you sitting on it, but by the work of the government putting a train station next to your house. All of a sudden your house goes up in value. Why do you get that value? Why can't it be? Why should I sit on it? Why should we allow people to kind of speculate? And it's still today is the same issue. I did say I would say this, that Henry George wasn't all great, honestly. So there's good and bad, and we got into this conversation about it. The land value tax is actually not a Democratic or Republican issue. It's kind of spans, and the people that are against it span both the left and the right as well. But Henry George was also a racist. I can't say what I'm thinking, but he was supporting. He supported the Chinese Exclusion Act for one, and felt like immigrants were a problem, and we know from data that immigration is like the best thing that can happen in a place like Philadelphia, where we're losing population. I'll get off of that soapbox now. So I went 25, 30 years ago to the Henry George House, and who are these people talking about this? And it made perfect economic sense. I'm an economist by training, and incentives make sense for us. So in Philadelphia, for example, a few years ago, 8 years ago, during the beginning of the Kenny administration, we were saying, how about trying this now? Because every 5 years or so, it comes back, because there's Josh and I have been on this like multiple times. It comes back as a thing because there's a new tax reform commission. Seems like there are all sorts of ideas, but never really what's the implementation. And we went to the Kenny administration and presented some information about how this could be good. And he was going for the soda tax. So, and there you have a tax that's an incentive. At least the way they presented it was supposed to be incentive for people to drink less soda. So, obviously people understand incentives, and incentives, if you're going to get taxed more for something, you will do it less, hopefully. And I think that's true on the whole. I mean, not everybody, but we know as an economist, that's people respond to incentives. And then in Philadelphia, I just want to point out our terrible history of people sitting on properties. Sam Rappaport, for those of you who haven't been around that long, he was a guy that owned a bunch of properties, mostly in Center City, but other places. And he just sat on them, and he never invested any money. The people that rented from him, it was an awful situation, but he knew that over time, Center City was going to get better. And then Liberty Place came, and he sold a bunch of properties, made a killing. And even, in fact, somebody died from, speaking of killing, a brick falling off of one of his buildings later on, where a number of bricks killed a judge. I don't know if you guys know that story. But anyway, the point is that people respond to incentives, and he wasn't paying his fair share. We have today, the Reading Company still owns a freaking, lot of the high line or whatever you want to call it, the viaduct, they're not paying their fair share of taxes. They're just sitting on it. They've been sitting on it for fucking how many years? I don't know, but it's like really annoying that they don't pay their share, and they're allowed to get the benefit and maximize their profit years later for that. I think that's totally wrong, and that's just two examples, big examples. Right now, in neighborhoods across the city, we see LLCs buying up properties on speculation because there's a lot of money out there. The people don't know where to put it. So they invested in an LLC, which starts buying up properties in places like Philadelphia, tries to turn homeownership into rentals, really negative things, or sitting on properties waiting for them to go up in value. So if we can at least disincentivize that, or at least make them pay for the right to own those things more, I think that's a good thing. And then the people that say, well, we're not sure if this is this can get through the state level because of uniformity. We already had, we've been doing this tax abatement thing, for people who improve their properties. How is that not, that's not really uniform for people that live across the street, that don't improve their properties. And in fact, when we had the 100% tax abatement for 10 years, there was some greater incentive to go to the land value tax because, hey, maybe I can benefit by having a lower land value, having a lower tax on my building and a higher tax on my land, just like the guy across the street who's only paying for, or the woman across the street who's only paying for the land.
So, thanks for all that. Well, while I have you on the abatement, maybe for the people that don't know, you can explain what the 10-year tax abatement is and how is it similar or different from land value tax?
Yeah, in fact, that if it's 100%, it was 100% for 10 years, it's actually a complete land value tax. So it is the experiment of what you would do if you went 100% of land value. You'd only pay for the tax on the land, but that tax rate should have been higher. And so that's the difference. We raise the tax rate a little bit and lower the tax rate on the improvements.
And crucially, this was only for new construction, correct?
For improvement, major improvement.
For major improvements, right? So you had this situation where somebody on a block could be paying less in tax than
an older person that's been living there for many years. And one last thing I think that comes up is I lost my thought. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. Well, I'm glad that you brought up, sort of the dark side of Henry George. I do think we need to acknowledge that when we talk about these ideas. So thank you for that. I also want to go back briefly to something Joe said, which I thought was really interesting about how even in Alaska, which we might think of as kind of the American frontier where land is limitless and in abundance, even there, that's not actually the case, and that the desirable land, the places where people actually want to live, that is scarce. And, if people are going to sort of occupy, monopolize, and exclude other people from that land, they're going to pay, if they want that right and privilege, they should compensate, I would say, everybody else, the public. So thanks for bringing that up. Let's see. I think actually we've gotten through the questions that I think I wanted to ask. So unless anybody else on the panel kind of wanted to speak to anything that was already brought up, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. Working at PACDC, we talk about affordable housing all the time and the need for more affordable housing. The mayor has said 30,000 new homes for affordable is her goal in the next during her administration. And if we are able to do and promote a land value tax, it promotes density because you want to build more on the same lot. So if you have an extra unit or two on each development that you're doing, you're creating more supply, which will keep the price of housing down. And we've seen that. And it just, so it is another incentive for people to build more affordably.
I just wanted to add to what Andy was just saying in terms of the on-the-ground effects of land value tax. I think I was supposed to speak to this earlier and I kind of skipped it. But absolutely infill development, right-size development. So in studies of what we call the Pennsylvania experience, which is those roughly 20 places that have used a split rate tax, you're not seeing McMansions go in next to row houses. You're seeing sort of what's already in the neighborhood being built in the neighborhood. You see reduced pressure for new development at the periphery, so reductions in sprawl that kind of couples with that infill development. You also see an increase in business starts. So when LBT goes into effect, more people start new businesses. Again, they're getting that message. What else? Fewer people going into tax arrears, specifically homeowners. So fewer homeowners who find themselves, not able to pay their property tax bills. And that's partly because land value tax tends to be more progressive, meaning that people with less pay less than a traditional property tax. So it has a lot to recommend it. And I also want to thank you for calling out Henry George's problematic elements. There tends to be a bit of hero worship of him as a human. And I think it's important that we think about the ideas and the policies and whether they're relevant in the 21st century, which is when we live. And I think that they can be. And I think Philly is a place where it's definitely worth a hard look.
Thank you. Unless any of the other panelists want to jump in, I can turn it over to the audience for any questions. And I'm just realizing that we don't have a mic out there, but for recording, maybe if you just want to shout your question, then I'll repeat it into the mic so the AV system can pick it up. So if anybody has a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. Oh, wow. I think right on the couch here.
I heard you talking about it remaining revenue neutral when it's implemented. What happens to revenue after it's implemented? You're saying overall revenues increase versus what there was before, stay the same? Is there a change?
So I know when the city of Allentown implemented it, one thing that they saw was data suggested that building permits increased 32% in the years following that. So it does incentivize people to build on these vacant lots, which will then put those lots to use. So I would say it does help.
So those people are presumably starting businesses, that's going to, like a wage tax or business income tax, that's going to contribute. When I build on a vacant lot, it's going to, and a new person moves in, that's going to make the other nearby businesses more productive. So I would imagine that there's sort of downstream, positive effects on revenue.
Correct. And that revenue neutral change does not mean that from year to year we have to keep adjusting this. It just means during that implementation. So after that change, when it does happen, then the assessed value will be uniform for everyone, and then the land would be assessed uniformly.
Well, I guess my follow-up question is it making the land more valuable over time after the implementation of the tax, thereby increasing the revenue just from the property tax, not including the other taxes? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this is a choice, just like with an existing property tax. If you look at her equations she was showing you, the basic algebra, whether the land goes up or down in value, there's evidence to show that the land rents would be going up under a land value tax, which is rents are different from the rent you pay on your apartment. It's an economic geeky concept. But you can set your mill rate to what you need it to be. If you decide in 2 years, we need more revenue, just like with a property tax, you can raise your mill rate, or you can lower your mill rate if you don't need as much money anymore. So you want to think about whether I always used to have to talk to people about this with a regular property tax in Alaska. There's two questions, right? There's the assessed value that you have, and there's your mill rate. And together, they make your total revenue. And so those are two completely separate questions, I would say.
So if I may add, to respond to, does it increase the value of land? So as was being explained, that the algebraic formula, it smoothes. So it improves the city and more construction and more businesses are brought in, and it eventually improves the health of the city, but not necessarily the value of the land. It's factored into the development.
Yeah, if I could, in Philadelphia, what I saw when I worked for the city were people that were not trying to get permits because they didn't want anybody to know they were improving their property. They were afraid of the assessments going up, or they just didn't improve their property. So there is a value that, a side value of actually collecting permit fees and improving the value of the neighborhood. So yeah, that might actually have an impact on the land because the whole neighborhood is getting better, which some people would say is gentrification. Other people would say that's a good thing. I mean, it has two sides to it. Yeah.
Jared. Yeah. What the right here said earlier about LBT. So, just out of curiosity, what does LBT stand for?
What does LBT stand for?
Land value tax.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's easier shorthand. Wouldn't talk about it as actually it's fine sale.
Thank you, Jared. Ben.
I'm sure people grumble everywhere about assessments, but in Philadelphia, there are particularly documented problems with our system, ranging from pretty arbitrary assessment numbers to a very protracted process for appealing and resolving challenges to assess values. And my question is, as a political matter, if we're going to push for a move to split rate taxation, do we need to fix the assessment and the OPA BRT process first, or can we push for split rate taxation even while we're still laboring under this flawed assessment system?
So, is Jimmy Williams here? Is anybody from OPA here? So Joe spoke to us a little bit before, I think partly about how, I don't know if you just want to repeat the point you were making about how they do this kind of fixed 20% thing at the moment for, the land apportionment for like a single family home, because it doesn't matter because they're taxed on the overall market value, right? At a single rate. If we were to move the split rate, we probably would have to change some of the assessment practices, like how land is assessed. But as Joe was saying, and as I could talk a little bit more, the analysis you may have seen before, which we'll put back up. This is based on some photo valuations that a company called ValueBase provided for us. There's a lot of things that are ultimately not that complicated, like vacant land sales, looking at teardowns, looking at like two identical houses that sell in two different places. What's the difference in their price? That's due to the land value. So there's all kinds of things I think you can do. And I know that OPA has been in conversation about these kinds of things with ValueBase, Lars Doucet, the mass appraisal analyst there. So I think it's doable. And yes, I think this would be part of the political push if we wanted to bring it here. We may need to do some reforms there. There's another thing I should talk to, which Andy mentioned before, and I should have provided this context earlier at the beginning of the panel, which is right now, City Council has convened a tax reform commission. Now that Johnson, Council President, has convened that, and we would love to get land value tax as one of the recommendations in their report that's going to be coming out this fall. The last tax reform commission recommended is 2003. And we would love for that to happen again. Did I answer your question, Ben, or are you speaking to something different?
Well, the basic question is a political one. Do we need to build public confidence that our assessment system works before we push for LBT, or is that the wrong order to do it in?
So we've done the analysis on your numbers, your actual numbers that you're taxed on now, and it is still more progressive to move to an LBT, although there's still do see savings and you have not just float to see savings. So do you need to do that? Possibly, but that's much harder, right? And so I think it's a question of,
Well, I mean, I feel like the objection I hear, maybe I'm just in a bubble, but is that the assessment values in Philadelphia are often arbitrary. They're often disconnected from reality. That similar properties, the improvement in the land are assessed at very different rates, and that undermines public confidence.
Yeah. So personally, I would want to see good. Okay, that was an editorialization. I would want to see values that were done independently, and that's what's been showing up on the screen. And I would want to see how the shift would compare on those to what the data are for the city right now, right? And that is what I would be interested in seeing. And there are some differences, right? And the work that value-based does is very state-of-the-art. And it's not to say the work that the assessors here are doing is not defensible, because I think it is. I've seen them present at conferences, and they're really, I mean, I understand the narrative that's out there, right? But then there's also the sort of professional standards that they are adhering to. So I think it would be a matter of looking at a sort of independent assessment and what that turns up. And again, if you're interested, we do have those numbers. And just looking at the difference. And then there's the court of public opinion, right? And that's a different thing. So that I can't speak to, but personally, as it's like putting on an analyst hat, I'd be really interested in what is the difference between what your numbers say right now and what numbers say that are based on, some different techniques.
So I would point out that no matter what system you have, there's going to be people that say my property is worth less than what you're telling me it's worth. I want to pay less. But today we're in a much better place. 10 years ago, we had this assessment thing that was really weird. It wasn't even your market value. They would give you a number, and then they'd take a percentage of that, and they'd change the percentage, or they'd change the number. And you never really understood where the tax was coming from, at least. And that was the way we were doing it for many years. And people were like, I don't know how. Like, my house was assessed differently from the property next door. And neither of them were assessed at what the market value was. So we couldn't complain. Like, you just never knew. But today we're much closer. This is the best chance we have, I think, it's in the last decades. So, they improved that under the Nutter administration. They came out with full value assessment, which makes total sense, right? So you know what your properties were before it wasn't. And I'd just like to point out politically, it is a political question. Jim Kenney had spoken in favor of it when he was in city council. Jonathan Seidel, who was our controller, spoke in favor of it. Derek Green spoke in favor of it, had hearings. But there's always some reason, like, some lawyer says, I don't know if it can do that. So I think it takes political will and the willingness to go forward no matter what. And we've seen this happen.
I want to jump over to Katrina.
I mean, normally when people are resistant to change, it's because they're the people that are full of something, they get a profit from the current system or whatever. So there's education, changing hearts and minds, there's political willpower, there's a committee, whatever. But like, really, what is the biggest barrier to systems change around this? Because you just gave that presentation and I was like, I'm in, I'm sold, let's do it. Like, and I know nothing about this, but I was like, why isn't it doubtless holding people back?
And you go ahead and done really well. I'm also just supposed to be the moderator.
I think people have been scared off by uniformity, even though it's done in over a dozen places across the state. Somehow Philadelphia is always like, well, we're different from everybody.
Did we talk about what the uniformity clause is? I don't know to be really super explicit about that. You say what that is, Andy.
Yeah, classes of taxation should be all the same. So you can't tax me differently than my next door neighbor because I have a store and he has a. So that's one of the things about uniformity, and it prevents us from having like a progressive income tax as well, which is kind of screwed up. But that's what we're stuck with in Pennsylvania. But in Philadelphia, I think if you look at all real estate as one class, so real estate, why does it matter if you're taxing land differently than building? Some people have argued the opposite, but how did we get the 100% tax abatement then on improvements? If that's not uniform. So, and all kinds of homesteading and the other things that we do that make taxes slightly different for different people. But I think the class of property, real estate, if you're talking about land, building, everybody's treated equally. So I don't see the issue. Is that a good explanation of what uniformity means?
Well, it's this phrase in the state constitution that says roughly that taxation upon all subjects of the same class shall be uniform. And so, not to get into it too much, but there have been state Supreme Court rulings that say real estate is one class, and you can't tax different types of real estate at different rates. And usually this is in the context of residential versus commercial. And so, the court had explicitly that in mind when they wrote those opinions, but that has spooked, the city law department, for example, here. There's reasons to think based on other case law. And I'm saying I've spoken to other lawyers that have looked at this, that have thought very hard and researched uniformity clause. There's other cases that make us potentially more optimistic about that. But, there's always going to be that risk. And city lawyers, right, they don't want to take on risk. So, that's, I think, at the end of the day, we need to sort of weigh the uncertainty about what would this look like if it went through the court system against all the benefits that we've been talking about how this would address speculation, housing costs, improve entrepreneurship and business starts, all of that. My opinion. Joe, did you want to say something?
So maybe taking a higher level view, and this fits in well with your points that you were making. There's a famous thing that us nerdy online folks like to say to everything, which is that a land value tax would fix this. And that's not necessarily true, though. There are a lot of problems in the world, and a land value tax doesn't fix everything. And I'll say that one obstacle is that it is the easiest thing in the world to get people to get their pitchforks out about taxes. I don't like my taxes. And Allegheny County had the land value tax for a long time. They had an issue with the assessments. They had other issues, but somehow the land value tax got blamed for it because there are some people who end up paying more. It's not the majority. It's not the median taxpayer, but there are people who don't like it. And as soon as there's one problem somewhere in your whole city, they say, well, a land value tax caused this. And so that's another obstacle that you're going to have to overcome.
Right. Let's see. Josh Vincent.
Oops, really? Naked Jawad. We sold on the bass at the soap, and I'm inside. And when you saw it, and fun, you got. He thought they catched it. And the Vaseline one was lost. That's why it's up. There was a difference in screen like the full associated with full land value tax versus good ratios of a study that would be not the typical stand. So you kind of like is there essentially a case made for the way since it's split the proxy 76% of the state tax is probably about assessment. Shit. median prevails.
Yeah, I think the idea is to do it really incrementally, as we were saying. You don't want to shock the system right off the bat, but you could do it just like our wage tax has been. You almost don't notice it, but it's changing over time, except for this year. But it's changing over time, and it's not like people are like noticing much of a difference. And I think you could do that just like incrementally. What was the other point was that, the law department. Yeah. So it takes leadership to get past the lawyers sometimes, because the lawyers will tell you anything you do is going to be at risk. So let's not do anything, because it's the easiest thing to do. And we don't have to worry about paying back, $50 to Mr. Smith, because we might lose that court case, even though there's been no, there've been no court cases in Pennsylvania around the land value tax over many, many years. So 100 years. So it kind of tells you that there's something to it that's not going to be able to be overcome. And if you do it incrementally, then the cost will be very low if it does happen. So you just keep going in that direction. I think that would be the way. And it might not have much impact first year in terms of incentives, but over time, you want to pick up more revenue from the renting company and people that are just sitting on property, and then tax other people less. It just makes total sense to me.
Tess. Stress issue.
Let's you and me should connect afterwards, Jawad, because we also have some legal analysis that says that Philadelphia does not need state enabling legislation to do this. That because we're a home rule charter, because of the Sterling Act, these things that sort of empower Philadelphia to levy tax, that we don't need to be explicitly told from the state that we can do this.
Get the other place.
Right. So the state legislature did pass legislation. Yeah, we can say a little bit about this. And does anybody else want to talk about the I don't have to speak, what the different classes are?
Well, we're the first class. So we're the best, of course. But there's only one of us, and Pittsburgh's the second class. So there's only one of them, I think. Oh, there's two, Pittsburgh and Scranton. But then everybody else is like third, or I guess third class. But I really don't know why they did that, except to say that we should have more rights because of them to do things that are not always, given to us by state. So we should have that capability. It's political, I think. And
what kind of jump in, or you, Michael, or Forkina, or?
Well, and this was glad that you heard what.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. But I think to answer your question, the state legislature explicitly passed laws to give permission to, I think, the second and third class cities to do LBT, but they never explicitly gave that permission to cities of the first class. So you'll sometimes hear lawyers say, well, that means that because the state legislature didn't explicitly give that permission to Philadelphia, that means by implication that they can't do it, which undermines kind of the home rule principle in the first place. And that's sort of the legal argument there. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Sorry, I don't really know the order I'm supposed to go in right here. Yeah.
And about that sick and stay going with their by that.
I think that's a good question for Andy.
Yeah, we want to protect urban farms and publicly utilized spaces in neighborhoods. So there have to be some sort of way to do that, either creating a nonprofit. We have Neighborhood Gardens Trust that holds properties, so they could be the entity. private? Well, if you're sitting on acres of land, yeah, you probably would pay more. Okay.
Well, I think that goes to kind of what they touched on before with uniformity purposes. You can't kind of pick and choose. You have to be uniform across the board. And if one is, a lot is held for a community garden, like you said, if that is a nonprofit or something like that, that I guess would be the avenue, because the nonprofits would then not be taxed.
Yeah, and if it's a small piece of ground, it's not going to be a lot more, right? Because we're talking about incremental right now.
I know the primary thesis would incentivize the town, but in this case, it sounded like it's incentivize the doesn't, but providing it's prohibition.
So I would just, Detroit, right? Detroit is seriously considering a land value tax. In Detroit, a lot of homeowners have side lots. So because there was so much vacant land, I think the city actually was selling those lots for like $1 or $100, like whatever, just take this land. And what they've done is in the legislation that they're considering is to grandfather those lots in or to exclude them from the land value tax. So if you as a homeowner purchased a side lot, that will not be subject to land value tax. So that notion of exemptions and abatements still being available, that might be a circumstance where that would be written in, so yeah, I mean, we're having to thread a lot of needles, right? Like, I don't think anybody wants to see all the green space in the city go away, the community gardens go away, any of that stuff. I think you're going for that holistic trend towards infill, towards reuse, towards reduction and speculation, but certainly you want to prevent as many of the unwanted casualties as you can. Yeah, and that's where a lot of the politicking happens, once you get kind of the general buy-in, and then it's, okay, how are we going to classify?
Yeah, maybe there would be a rebate or something, a side yard rebate that could happen.
They could, what evolved that for a while. Yeah, you.
I have thoughts on that, but I'm curious what other people do.
So again, remember, we can adjust the mill rate on what we have. So whatever that land is worth, if the city needs more revenue, maybe caused by that giant apartment building being built and there's more residents, the vacant lots pay even more now. That's, you can raise the revenue you need to. Like, I think that's two separate questions. Why? And so, yeah, I think the city, if you have a sales tax, if you have any other sorts of taxes, that revenue is going to be going up as well. So, you're going to have a more thriving, dense community in place, and you can raise the money you need to. You don't have to do that sort of one-to-one. It has to come from this thought.
And I would say, we're not talking about 100% land value tax. At least I'm not in favor of that. I wouldn't. Well, might be. But
The other thing is there's so many other values people coming, and especially in Philadelphia, we have a big wage tax. We can actually capture a lot of their value people working, and the permits, the permitting fees, the construction jobs. There's a lot of other value in having development beyond just the tax at the end of the day. So, we've shrunk in the last few years as a city. So I think we still want to encourage and welcome people to come here. And one way is to have more development.
And you always have your zoning, right? So you always have zoning, right? So that's sort of how a municipality articulates what it wants to see on the grounds. I know because I spent a lot of time in like the planning space that often planners and, the folks in charge of zoning will use really ambitious zoning plan, and then they're super disappointed because they never reach highest and best use, right? So it's almost always the case that you're not attaining the level of development that you want. But certainly the zoning is to be the place in air rights. There's so many tools in the toolbox that you can use to kind of fine tune these things. I think the thing with land value tax is not that it is the single answer to any particular problem, but that it creates conditions where a lot of this kind of wicked problems of cities can begin to be addressed, or at least you're not signaling the opposite of what you say you want to the left end.
Rather academic. That's all. Got it. But me, you can see about the farm. At least I didn't. God, you're right. I've heard in top, I think I need it. And it's Lake area. Maybe. Oh.
I could speak to that, but okay. So a couple of things. You may already have heard sort of the theoretical argument why that's not going to happen, right? Which is that prices are set by supply and demand. And the land value tax, land isn't fixed supply. So a land value tax is not going to discourage its production, its supply. So therefore, the price of land, the rent should not change. Now, what actually happens when LVT is implemented? What's the empirical evidence? What you see is when the tax on land goes up or down, that is fully reflected in the price of land. It is fully capitalized into the price of land. And that happens because buyers and sellers of land know that if the land tax goes up, for example, the price of the land goes down because the buyers and sellers of the land know that it doesn't change the rent that they can charge. It doesn't change the future income that they can expect from this piece of land. Does that answer your question? So there's economic there's sort of theoretical arguments, and then there's actual sort of like economic empirical studies of this in places where LBT has been implemented, where the taxes, the rates go up and down, and actually sort of a pseudo-random kind of controlled experiment fashion. In Denmark, this has happened, and it did not change the rents. Yeah.
Not to say that rents cannot deteriorate the rise, that there's a lot of variables that lead to rise of prices, right? And I've seen so many times political discussions go off the rails at this point because, yes, this is true. And yet rents still rise because the market will bear it. And I've heard politicians say, well, I'm a blonde, maybe I can't understand it, but when I look around, I see rents going up no matter what. That was quite close to a quote. So just to say, that's absolutely true. And the reality is that in a market where rents can rise, they will. And so, I think for people who care about LVT and they want to see it implemented, it can be very tempting to kind of get on that track, which isn't wrong, but it doesn't pass muster in every room you're in. So just something to think about.
I think there may have been people in the back that I've skipped a while. Against the wall with the big beard.
Yeah, it's like that for
Does anybody feel like they have a good handle on this?
I can speak. So I would say Detroit, my cynical view on this is that it has nothing to do with the actual policy. There's some internal Democratic caucus drama. And so there's always going to be internal Democratic or Republican caucus drama or city council drama that you got to overcome. I can't predict that, but I don't think it's because of a particular failing of land value tax. And then maybe Andy, someone was talking about, you probably have the Allegheny County story. I think Pittsburgh is actually likely to happen in the next couple of years again. But when it went down again, I really don't think it had a lot to do with the actual land value tax policy.
And I was going to add to that, with the city of Allentown, there were fairgrounds that was, I guess they were very against it just because of how much vacant land that they had, and then a couple used cars, I think. And those were like the two biggest opponents of it. And I think...
Yeah, in Philadelphia, we have parking lot owners too, who are very influential, and they're already paying a parking tax, so they feel like they're being double taxed if we were to do something like this. So we have to think about how do we manage that conversation. I think that maybe we lower the parking tax when we raise the land value tax or something. I don't have an answer for that right now, but that is an issue. The people that we don't want to call winners and losers, right? We just say those who pay more and those who pay less, but a lot more people will pay less than pay more. But people that pay more are maybe the most influential. So those are the people that you have to worry about.
One interesting example was Melbourne, Pennsylvania. So they had a full land value tax. Pennsylvania. It's right outside of Philly. It's right outside of Philly. They had a full land value tax, which they implemented primarily because they had one very large vacant lot, which had been a Sears and Roebuck site. That site was redeveloped. Josh, what was it? Medical facility of some sort? Yeah. And all of a sudden, they flipped off their LVT and flipped back on a regular property tax. Why? Because they realized that their residents would actually save more under that scenario. And, I think the diehards would be like, terrible, that should never happen. Personally, I think it's kind of cool. They needed to get this done. They used this tax policy to get it done. It worked. And now they're doing the next thing that's going to work for their municipality. So that was an instance where it was kind of a surgical application.
That same row with the glasses. It's like,
it's an easy on. What? Why we're looking outside this area?
Because most homeowners, most residential properties will see a tax cut, and people love for their taxes to be cut. That's sort of the how I think we want to message this. That most residences see a tax cut. The average, the median is a tax cut. Most businesses would see a tax cut. that, hey, that speculator in your neighborhood that you hate, you want to punish them, let's jack their taxes up, right?
What order at block or client seat. So a lot of that say client and no down the city fine. Oh, so it is where like the C and A and at the fate.
Yeah, you're talking about like the land bank and things like that, or just any. Yeah, I think certainly if we were to, flip a switch and do LVT tomorrow, publicly owned land by the city is not going to be affected, I think, by this. But there's tens of thousands of privately owned vacant lots in the city. There's lots of upside. And then, think of all the other just sort of like parking lots and the other pieces of underutilized land. So I think there's still, even if you just look at what land is held privately, there's still a lot of upside here.
One other thing that we didn't talk about yet was the nonprofit, like University of Pennsylvania owned land. You could use the land value tax as a way to get to the value, a number that you could charge them, places like that don't play their fair share, honestly. So that is one way to do it, because there's no pilots in place. We're not payments in lieu of taxes for you guys. I don't know, but there are a lot of nonprofits that pay very little or nothing in taxes or in payments that are actually being helped by by the cities doing all these things for them, but they're not paying their fair share. So it is one way to use that valuation to try to figure out what would they pay if they were. I think it's done in other places. They use the land value as the metric to figure out what the tax would be.
Will Tung.
They come back.
Yeah, so to repeat Will's question, why shouldn't we make the rich pay? Is basically your question. And I think there's I have a couple thoughts about this. I mean, one is that, we've sort of been eliding the difference a lot of in this conversation between like a pure or full land value tax where only the value of the land is taxed. It's more common to tax both the land and the improvements, but just tax the land at a higher rate. So, you would still be, if we had a split rate like Allentown has, for example, the helipad would still be getting taxed a little bit. I think, but there's kind of a political question here, right? Like, what do you care about more? Do you care about sort of addressing blight, or do you care more about sort of punishing people who have money, right? And I know not everybody agrees on that. The way I just, you can tell how I feel about it. But, I think as a city, we're going to have to, if we want to do this, sort of find sort of what balance of that do we like? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Gee, the big other thing we could have done is that Mr. Dutton.
So my perspective, one thing that actually I could have said this in answer to one of his questions, is that in Alaska, just like everywhere else, you saw this sticker shock from assessments. People were like, my house is not worth $700,000. That's ridiculous. They would go crazy, and that's what I would get calls about all day long as the state assessors. Like, my local assessor is crazy. They just said this thing. And they don't have the right perspective. I always have to tell them, like, what's your tax bill going to be at the end of the year? If everyone's assessment went way up, If they all went to market, the city has to still raise the same amount of money, and it doesn't matter what the assessor did. Did he go crazy? Did he not? I think that putting a land value tax, putting the tax on land as opposed to the full value of the property actually reduces some of that sticker shock. And it gets people have an idea in their head of what their house is worth. They probably don't have as much of an idea of what their lot is worth. And so when at first, like, the confusion sometimes is a negative point, but I think it could be a positive point. They're like, wait, what? Okay, so it's a higher tax on part of, what's my tax bill? That's what I want them to be asking. That's a more democratic city, I think, small d democratic. Where we should be focusing on what are we paying at the end of the day for our services, and I think that gets the focus on that.
Generally, as housing's less affordable, people are looking for solutions to build more housing, right? And EMBs love this policy because they see it as a key to more housing. So yeah, this policy is coming up in places where affordability is a major issue, because people are casting around the tools that are in place right now aren't doing the job. So what else is out there? Prop 13 is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just a ton of people who would absolutely die to see this implemented. Maybe not literally die, but would love to see this implemented. And then it always comes back to Prop 13. Always, always. And then to the question about the taxing the rich, right? I think it depends on how you view property tax. I've seen a really effective argument against land value tax, that property tax should be a use tax. And therefore you should be looking at the improvements, right? Because if I've got a mansion, I'm using a heck of a lot more, as you're saying, of a city than somebody with a dilapidated row house probably is, right? And so I've definitely seen LVT take a blow from folks who argue from that perspective. It's, if you're an advocate or not, it's something to be aware of.
I mean, that's, yeah.
And I think to touch on the whole helicopter pad, it is a tool, like everyone has been saying. So for the dilapidated, that's where you have a code and try and get them up, that house up to code and kind of enforce it that way.
Any other questions? The down the pop-up of it does already start. It's every time done. That's done. That then it the blade what it right now.
So just to repeat the question for posterity, which I have not been doing, could Allentown speak to some of the economic benefits that the city has seen in response to implementing a split rate taxation?
Again, we have it since 1996, so 28 years, and it has kind of become a norm now. No one questions that. And what we have seen over the years is that it's more affordable for middle class, median income families. So more homes are being built, row homes, single family homes, and the businesses are coming in. So that's how the economic growth is increasing, and more homes, more residents. So our earned income tax actually has surpassed our property taxes. So that's the growth that we are seeing.
Very interesting. Any other questions? It's also about 8 o'clock. We've run well over. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. That's it for the program tonight, but we have the space until 9 if you want to stick around and drink a little bit more, have a little bit more food. Otherwise, thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate all your questions. This is really great. Thank you so much.